Hello, 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 wherever you are in the world today. Thank you for joining us on Association Rockstars, where we hear about the journey and the insights of amazing association professionals and partners who are building the association industry of tomorrow. I'm Amy Hager, not your usual host. Lowell is getting off of a airplane and will be here shortly with us. But I'm a strategic advisor here at Vista Cova and the co-founder of Association Rockstars. And with me today, I'm super excited. If Lowell was ever going to be late for any of our conversations, this was the one to be so because I've known Julia Miller, the director of the Minnesota Credit Union Network, for a couple years now. And she's been the communications director for about 8 years. And today she's really going to dive in how, over about a 24-month period, she guided the Minnesota Credit Union Network through a journey to simplify their work and really raise their engagement with members through communications. And when she's not a communications superstar, she is a mom to two cute little kiddos. And before joining the current association she's at, she was actually on the regulatory side of the world. So it's kind of cool that you've been able to take some of the influences that you had from other positions and bring it to the what you're doing here at MinQ. So thanks for joining us today, Julia.
Yes, thank you. Happy to be here.
Yay! Well, so where we love to kick off our conversation, and this is always super fun to hear everyone's answer, is we believe that everyone does have a superpower, especially our rock stars. And so if you had to say what your superpower is, what would that be?
Well, as a communicator, I consider myself a generalist and master or jack of all trades, master of none. But with a little twist, I do have a good ability to dive deep into different subject areas, different tools when I need to solve a problem. So surface level, yes, but then I can really parachute in to all the rabbit holes to solve problems for communications.
I
So,
love that. I love that. And I
mhm,
feel like sometimes those rabbit holes, and that's one thing that we did in your audit, is really, really fun to
mhm,
go down,
yes,
to really dissect. And then there's that time where you have to be up at the eagle's eye and flying
yes.
above it all. And so take us back to 2023 when
Mhm.
you really kind of decided to go down this path and really start making some changes instead of just doing things because it's the way that you've always been doing them.
Yep. So in 2023, I had been at the network for 5 years.
Mhm.
The first couple of years I had spent obviously orienting to an association world, and it's a different model. I have different audiences than working in state government. And I had spent a lot of time on finding the right tools. Went through a couple different email management systems. We transitioned to a new association management software, built a new website, implemented some project management procedures and some structure there.
Mhm.
Um, and so by 2023, I was, you know, off to the races. I was on on all cylinders, whatever automotive or sports metaphor you want to use.
Yeah.
Um, but I didn't really know what was working and what wasn't. Um, it was, nothing was on fire as your audit kind of found, Amy. We weren't losing memberships. We didn't have hordes of disengaged members. We were getting event registrations. But we had a lot on our plate. We're a small team. Associations, you have to kind of roll with the punches.
Yeah.
And it kind of felt like we were white knuckling it from event to event, like telling myself, okay, I just got to get through this project. I just got to get through this week and it'll be fine. And we know how that goes. It just
Right.
keeps going. So I really needed to take a step back and determine what was the best use of my time. Kind of a backdrop to this in 2023 earlier in April, we had a new CEO named, and that was an internal hire,
Okay.
but then it changed some internal reporting structure. And as a result of that, we had some fresh eyes on our communications team. And they looked at what our workload was
Yeah.
and did not think it was sustainable and wanted us to, we use a closet metaphor a lot. There's lots of clutter, and if you keep adding things, you're not going to even be able to shut the door. So it was just, we had kept adding projects or initiatives or different ways to communicate. And we had a lot of new initiatives coming on board that were needed my time. So I needed to really figure out the best use of my time.
Okay, I love that. And I think one thing that really kicked it off when you were at this stage is you had shared this with me, and I actually want to kick off kind of, well, after I put down our slides, is that you really couldn't have everything be the priority.
Hmm.
And so the first step, the first experiment that you actually took was cutting back on social media. And you just kind of did
Hmm.
that intuitively. And
Hmm.
so, how did that conversation go with your team? How did that conversation go with yourself? Because as communications folks, we are definitely told that social media is where we need to be and we need to show up and we need to be on all the platforms. So, how did you first take that experimental step of scaling back on social media?
Some of it's out of necessity. I mean, there's only so many hours in the day. And by the end of 2023, I had a gut feeling that posting on social wasn't translating into event registrations, program adoption, um, and just looking, I had spent a lot of time building out different campaigns for different initiatives, creating all the wonderful Canva art,
Yep.
and working in social media, but I wasn't sure if it was worth the time. I kind of had a sense that if I stepped back from that a little bit and just not put as much pressure on myself to crank out the most beautiful branded Facebook posts, but just kind of share content when we could and what was needed, and just not worry about having a full social media calendar. And sometimes we kind of went pretty quiet, um, but then focusing on um, event prep or email as a way to engage our members.
Yeah. And so then when we looked at those numbers and really dove into your first experiment, the numbers were pretty amazing of how much she had scaled back, like 80% of the social media effort.
Yes.
And you were still reaching about the same amount of people. And when we did our audit, it was, September of last year. So there were
Mhm.
still going to be about 3 months left
Yeah.
into the calendar year. And so in my mind, there was no doubt that you weren't going to get to about that same number of reach.
Hmm.
And so really taking that first step of realizing you have to communicate differently and you have to really focus on where can you make the better impact. But the bigger question was how? It's always that big question of like, how do
Hmm.
you communicate differently, right? And so then that's when you decided to really go through a communications audit.
Hmm.
And so when you decided that that was the next best step, I know you're going to talk a little bit more about getting buy-in at the end of our conversation,
Hmm.
but how did you go about, deciding that's what you were going to lead? You were already with a full plate. How did you know you were even going to have time to do an audit?
Yep. So I went to a conference in December of 2023. It was a conference of my cohorts in other states who work for credit union, trade association, or trade associations in different states. So people had similar roles. And that's kind of my happy place because it's at the end of the year, and then we all kind of I get together with other people, and I'm like, oh yes, they are going through the same things I'm going through, and I find it really valuable, as most association people do. Um, and one of a colleague in another state had underwent a communications audit,
Okay.
and that really intrigued. It was intriguing to me because it could help me figure out where are we getting conversions? What is actually working? Is it our messaging that needs to change? Is it what platform we're using? I kind of just felt like we were flying blind. We were just focused on getting emails out, and sometimes we sent out like 5 emails in a day because it was we were on a time crunch. So we wanted to have a more member first approach, and a thoughtful approach, and not just like I said, white knuckling it.
Mm. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a
Hmm.
lot of sense. And I know Lowell just jumped on and he didn't quite catch the first beginning part.
Yes.
But Lowell, welcome.
Thank
Meet
you.
Julia. Julia,
No,
meet
I
Hi,
Lowell.
already,
Lowell.
hi, Julie. I already have three questions.
Great.
I mean, just from the little bit that you shared, and this will probably come later, but where I'm going to go later is that how do you, you have to translate impact, right? Translate intention, effort,
Hmm.
and impact, right? And so, the smaller but focused effort, I can't wait to the narrative part of the impact part of it.
Hmm.
I love it. Well, so let's go ahead and if you guys have any questions, throw them in the chat during the whole time. You're gonna see two Lowells answering them. One is me and one is the real Lowell. And so we'll definitely be bringing in those questions throughout. But where I really want to take this conversation next is I really want to do a few show and tells with you all of what I saw when I dove into Julia's reporting, some of the rabbit holes that we ended up going down to, and kind of that how did we then come up with the actual answers that we came up with? And so, again, Julia really started this path by going through this experiment just through her intuition of scaling back on social media and realizing that she wasn't missing out by not showing up there as much. And so when we reviewed their analytics, all of their engagement data, we went down and looked at buying patterns and we even added in some member interviews. So that way we could really analyze if the channels that they were using were the best way to communicate. And they had newsletters, they had their event emails, they had their website, they had their CRM, their socials, and they also had an app. And so by really dissecting all of those and looking at the data of each of those and figuring out when is it that it is important to be using this channel and you don't have to use that channel all year round and where is the priority for you to focus as a communications team. I think that it really was unique to uncover it was okay to switch from one thing to another and not have to spend the whole year focusing on, let's for example, the app. And especially with that social media information and really realizing that you didn't have to show up there every day, but you could still make the same impact with less effort. And so, where we first went, and this is probably where all of you would first go if you're a communications person, is we dove into their emails. And so we noticed that their click rates were a little bit above average, but their open rates were below average. So, those who were engaged, and those who weren't really there weren't actually even opening the emails to begin with. So there was a great group of members that were kind of missing those vital communications. And so we wanted to really expose how could you get more open so that therefore your clicks would continue to go up as well. And the answer isn't always more is better is better.
Hmm.
So where could we really find something that was better? And like Julia said, they really had some great things going from them. And I kept saying, your house is not on fire. Like, this isn't too terrible. So that means we have to dig deeper to really figure out how can we get members to open those messages and to open those emails. And so that then led us to also, make sure that we understood when they were engaging, and we pulled this from their social media, is they really were visuals. They needed that visual photo to really engage with. And we found out it was just single photo, not multiple photos. And we utilized that social media information to kind of start influencing some of the things that they could be doing in their emails and maybe including something visual, not just written pieces. And when we really dove into the buying patterns, and I think, Julia, this is like my favorite part of your audit, is
Hmm.
it was really unique to be able to pinpoint specific days and specific habits that her members had. And this is where we really then were able to drive any forward event emails, any forward promotions, and things along those lines, and really scale back. And so we realized that a general promotion, so like a mention about an event, about their annual meeting, let's say, in their general email or in their general newsletter, really got no registration at all. There was no one purchasing if they happened to mention it in the newsletter. And there was absolutely no purchases happening from social media posts. And so right there, we were like, there's work that you can eliminate because the members aren't utilizing what you're putting out there anyways. But where are the registrations coming in? So we noticed it came in on the opening day of registration. We noticed it was the early bird deadline and the last chance registration were the three biggest days. But we also noticed there was an increase whenever there was an in-person gathering that might have mentioned the annual meeting.
Mhm.
And so we wanted to make sure that as we were thinking about going forward, the strategy would be, all right, let's let them take action on the days they like to take action on. And you always have those coworkers that freak out because nothing's happened in 2 weeks and the early bird deadline's coming up in 2 weeks and no one's registering. Well, now she can look at that data and say, we
Mhm.
know from the buying patterns of the members, they don't register until the deadline anyways. And so unless you're giving them a different incentive to register before your early bird deadline, don't waste the energy worrying. And
Mhm.
when we really got down to even like who was doing the purchasing, we found out that there were some of the members who had an admin that were purchasing multiple tickets. So it was really, really important for communication to go out to those people specifically to make sure that they didn't forget to, purchase the 6 or 10 tickets to the
Mhm.
annual meeting for their entire office. And so, Julia, as you were sitting through this buying pattern, kind of, I don't know, archaeologically digging through
Yes.
all of the data and all of the purchasing, was there anything else that really stood out to you that you were like, wow, either I knew this about the members and I'm really glad I know this now and I have the data to back it up, or this was something I wasn't really expecting from them?
I think we generally knew that people were driven by deadlines. That's kind of human nature, but it was good to um, have that information to back that up, have data to show our CEO, our VPs that we will get people registered based on our buying patterns.
Yeah.
And it relieves some of the angst about that, and then also informed how we message our events. So we could just send out 3 emails, and that's how we get our registration really.
Right.
And just taking the time to schedule those out, and not spending a lot of time on creating different articles on it. And that's something that can drive registration, but just realizing where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And I think that's really, really true. Lowell.
Was there a difference? I mean, I love that it was the focus on where you're actually seeing the responses, and I imagine so much of that are from people who either came before, who already were involved, or already members. In the analysis you all did, and then the strategy that you chose, was there any hyper focus on where new lanes of new attendees were going to come from as well?
So we didn't really need to focus on the new lanes of new attendees because the one thing that they don't have is they don't really have that problem where there's new
Mm,
members and members are dropping. They might have the issue where there's a
Mhm.
new admin person or a new person
yeah.
working at an
Yeah.
organization. But Julia, your guys' retention rate was it 90 something if I remember right?
We want it to be at least 90, and it's like 89% sometimes.
Okay.
But yeah, we have 86 credit unions in Minnesota. 76 are members. And then we have some associate members who financial institutions that are headquartered in different states. So we generally have good retention. Sometimes engagement ebbs and flows, and we always want to track how our members are seeing the value of the network. But that's there's we track things year to year on event registrations at our annual conference too. So.
Yeah. So then the other piece that was really interesting about the audit was when we did the member input. So I went and interviewed a few of their members and we kind of did that wide variety. And this is something Lowell has always taught me is to make sure that you get some
Mhm.
under engaged, some over engaged, the different membership, business sizes and everything along those lines. And so it was interesting, though, no matter how unengaged or really engaged they were, how they all had really confirmed that the values of joining MinQ was advocacy, the resources, and the events. And so there also was some questions in my heart as I was going through all of this with them of, are they spreading themselves too thin by offering too many programs? And so we even talked about how to go through and eliminate programs and look through the effectiveness of those. But they all confirmed that email was their preferred communication channel. They echoed about the too many resources. And it was interesting because the ones who were following them on social media really viewed them as a media channel on social media. They
Mhm.
loved hearing about, the new board members, about the foundation scholarship winners, about the fundraising efforts. And so they weren't even aware that MinQ was putting events on their
Mhm.
social media. They were loving to hear about each other in the social media. And so that was a really, really cool view that we were able to kind of ask, okay, what is the strategy going forward? How can we continue to promote the members, the really cool things they're doing in their community, but also the cool things that they're doing with MinCune as an organization? And so that member input piece was the last piece of the audit, and then just kind of bringing everything together. And so, Julia, you guys are in your 100th year as an
Mhm.
organization, and you made some pretty dramatic changes, I will say, this year with your communication strategy.
Mhm.
So, why don't you kind of walk us through what you decided to tackle first and how it's been going so far?
Yes. One thing we noticed with the social media audit was our members, they love seeing people. People love people. So we saw a lot of bang in our buck if we just shared photos from an event. That would get way more engagement than pushing out an event registration reminder. Um, and overall, we looked at how we could do our communications better and more efficiently. One thing that I had mentioned earlier that I had spent the first couple years at MinCune finding the right tools for our association management software, email, website, but we hadn't really changed the structure of our communications or the messaging. One key takeaway that we did right away based on Amy's recommendations was to tell members what they will get out of by attending this event, by registering for this webinar. So that was changing our uh, our the subject lines in our email, and that boosted our open rate about 6%, I would say. Um, and just taking a look at that email and breaking it down in bullets. I coming from the government sector, we went through a plain language initiative. This was about 10 years ago, and I went back to that and remember just tell people what they need to know. What's the bottom line up front? We don't have to make everything an academic exercise and show them how many words we can put in an email. We just need to tell them who needs to be here, what they'll get out of it. Um, and we learned that less is more. But that takeaway I took to look at our weekly email newsletter that we sent out pretty much to all our members. And it was blog based on our blog. So I would do different blog posts based on news from different silos, essentially, of our organization, just different areas. But our members don't really see, oh, this is our communications people, this is our compliance people. We're all the network. So bringing everything together rather than taking a siloed approach. So what I did was we moved our email. It was always on a Wednesday. It ended up not making sense why we did that by that point in time. And then we shifted it to Monday, but then took a different approach of, like I said, less is more, where it's just what members need to know for that week and pointing everything back to our website because I was spending a lot of time repurposing content that was already on our website. That was our event registrations, some of our other resources. So just bringing everything together in one email and pointing to it and listing. While we saw that event registration wasn't driven by mentions in our newsletter, we do have a calendar of what's coming up, what's next to expect. And that alleviates some of kind of the angst. Oh, we need to keep pushing that registration when we do know that there's those three sort of key moments in our members' buying patterns. Um, and then I also learned that repeating, I can never say things enough. We feel like we're being redundant, but less is more, and then repeat that. So rinse and repeat. So I shifted our weekly newsletter, and it's just so much easier to put together on Mondays. I've already got it done. So whereas I used to be scrambling every Wednesday, proofreading long articles from across the organization, um, it's just kind of this is what people need to know, and that's recognizing that our members aren't going to sit up and curl up next to the fire and read our newsletter. They just need to know what they need to know. So we're just providing that to them, recognizing they're busy people, and they know we all know how to write. So just making it easier for them to find what they need on a weekly basis. We also just recognizing that they saw us as a media outlet and they liked seeing celebrations. I introduced a new newsletter that's monthly, and it's a little more of a softer focus. It's longer form content, and we're pulling it across organizations, and we're highlighting people and celebrating people. One other recommendation we did with that for based on Amy's advice was to track how many mentions we get from, or how many members or credit unions are mentioned in each newsletter. So we're being democratic, we're sharing, we're making sure that we aren't paying too much attention to one particular member or another, that we're really covering the waterfront there. Um, a couple other things was just it was kind of the attitude check. It's how we approach things, or how I approach things. So our 100th year anniversary is this year, and rather than looking at it as another thing to do or another project to spend time on, I thought of it as something to inform and guide our communications, all our communications in 2025. So so I looked at it as an opportunity. My branding is pretty much set. My messaging can develop from that. We have a theme for our conference, and so that really helped guide a lot of our branding and our messaging for the year. So I think just taking a look at what we can do, what we need to do, and what's really important, and
Mm.
just understanding less is more. And that just taking a look at a particular request and understanding what's the most important thing that needs to happen and how can we address it efficiently and quickly.
Can you tell us a little bit, Julie, about how you brought leadership and the executive level into this? How did you bring them the idea of doing this audit in the first place? And especially when you came with them with the results of it saying we're actually going to do less. Was 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 there pushback to that? How'd you navigate it? Right, what's the story there?
I was very fortunate to have a lot of support in this. I had mentioned the idea of a communications audit, and our VP really embraced that and saw that as a solution. And we could have done an audit by ourselves, or we looked at our email open rates, our website visits, just kind of, having a quick glance at all of our analytics. But leadership at the network really supported getting an outside view and an outside perspective just to see this is what's working and what's not. And and Amy was super helpful because she understood the association rules and the intricacies. So we needed an informed but outside perspective. So it was made a priority by leadership. They wanted this to something that we should undertake and that should be done sooner rather than later. So I was pleasantly surprised by the support I had from our leadership.
Hmm. And from how you opened it with them, right, in terms of the premise of the audit to how you reported the other side of it, what has been how you've kept them in the loop or where they've had any concerns with the subsequent actions?
Um, I think it reminds me that repeating and just sharing what we're doing, why we're doing it, goes a long way. And talking about and I'm like to think of myself as a worker bee and just put my head down and get things done, but recognizing that I'm a leader and I have expertise, and they're looking for me for guidance on how we should communicate and what's the best way to do that, even if it means scaling back less on social media. But we had proof points from Amy's audit on what was worth spending our time. So.
Love that.
Yes, and sharing internally, just celebrating success, I think is important. So,
I feels like you got sort of the gift of time back. You know, time is this most precious commodity as we
hmm
talk to everyone in every position today's day and age.
hmm
Uh, with the gift of time you got back, or if this continues to prove it, if you feel like from what this has taught you, what is one thing you're hoping to do for the organization the coming year in this world that you haven't yet done, but you hope to have the chance to do?
hmm Um, one thing I'd like to do more is segmenting our audience a little more,
Mm.
particularly when I keep talking about event registrations because we have an event heavy calendar. One thing I would like to do that we've not done is when we send out those event reminders, sometimes we're sending to people who are already registered. So
Mhm.
we need to work that out. Then that takes a little bit of time. And you mentioned the gift of time, so I'm looking forward to working on that. I also want to look at our member journey, and we have done this to some degree or another, but as a new staff person starts working for a credit union and then they get into our system, we need to welcome them and then have some sort of checkpoints along the way. So putting them on a member engagement journey. And I also want to look at some of our unengaged users, from an email perspective. Um, why aren't reaching out and seeing what we can glean on why they are engaged, if they want to update their preferences, how we can best serve them. So it's a more member focused approach.
You know, if you those tuning in today or listening afterwards, some of which may have done a similar audit to refine, but I imagine that a number are interested in this because they could see the benefit of it. Any advice you would give to someone who hasn't done something like this before about what they need to have ready to do this well? Like, is there a level of data integrity that's needed to do this? Is it just there's a will, there's a way? Like, if someone wanted to get ready to do this, like, what advice would you give them?
Um, I mean, I think taking a step back a little bit, and Amy and I talked about this a little bit, how when you have a problem and you're taking it to a supervisor or your boss's boss, you need to have a solution. And they appreciate that. And then the bonus is they're probably going to go with your solution. So you
Yeah.
can guide that. Um, one thing that, yeah, it depends on what systems you're working with. Facebook and Instagram and email marketing software, they have reporting capabilities. So you need to take a look at that and see what you have. Um, Looking at your website and seeing what kind of resource you might need there. And I think working with someone can be super helpful to get that outside perspective and that buy-in because you're making the case that you want to spend your time on what is most effective, what's the most bang for your buck, and not just spinning your wheels.
You know, to that end, Andy in the chat asked the question. You remember that you mentioned that members focus on three primary areas of value: advocacy, guidance, events. Have you taken any steps to winding down some of the other things that weren't seen as key to the value proposition because of this? Saying no is not the strength of our organizations always.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question. So, and I think looking at, I know Amy can talk about a program impact matrix. That's something to utilize. It is hard because we also want to say yes for members. That's what we're in the business for. Um, and I think looking at combining events, I mean, we have different audiences for events for our Women's Leadership Network and other sort of interest groups within our organization. One way to look at that is how can we combine things while everyone's at the annual conference. So taking that opportunity to customize the experience for different members. But yes, saying no is not something we want to do. That's tough. And I think it's just really looking at the buying patterns and making the case for what you can do with your resources, assuming they're limited. Most associations have limited resources and staff, perhaps. So I think it's making the business case for all of these events and these activities.
Uh, the business case is key, but I have to say, from just your description of how you've approached this, sounds like you easily could be a staff of 50, 75, 100 from how much you're talking about that you do.
Yes.
How big are you all actually, and how do you find that the
We
internal
have,
structure?
yeah, we have 15 people total on our staff. And we're a pretty established organization. Credit unions have been around for 100 years in Minnesota. Um, and So we have, and we're all kind of subject matter experts, and we are the experts in each of our areas. I'm the main communications person. I don't have a staff, but I work with other people across the organization who work in events or engagement. And then I support our advocacy team, our non-dues revenue team as well. So um, people love to come to work for the network and they spend a lot of time there. And so we have a lot of tenure and a lot of expertise. Um, and then I think that's also looking at leveraging partners, working with people like Amy. We have some contracts where we work with teams to help as well.
So you've given us so much perspective, information, and really a narrative of a choice, like a really dedicated choice to sort of buck the trend of like, we just keep doing more, someone will listen.
Hmm.
So the story itself is one that's interesting and good to learn from. I asked the one or two questions we got in the chat. If anyone else has one, they're welcome to post it. Amy, is there anything that I haven't asked that you want to add?
I think
Um,
I
Go ahead,
think
Amy.
one thing that we maybe glossed over when we kind of kicked this conversation off today, Julia, is we also looked at the mission and vision statement of your organization to really make sure that one, you guys were upholding to that, especially within your communication strategy and
Yes.
such. And I think there were some very clear maybe scope creep when you look at programs and such. And
Yes.
so it was interesting to see how aligned they were, at least with the communication strategy. But when you're thinking about eliminating programs and talking about programs, um, that I think the first question that we have to ask, and the first question that I asked Julia was, please send me your mission and vision statement. I really want to make sure that in your strategic plan, that you guys are aligning your actions with that strategic plan. And it's not
Yeah.
just something that was created and, put on a shelf. And so if you're thinking, gosh, like this audit idea is something that I don't think our organization can achieve, where I would start is asking
Hmm.
yourself, do I know as the communications person in my organization what our strategic priorities are? And have I aligned the
Hmm.
efforts of this organization to those priorities as well? Or am I off in la la land just kind of doing what I think needs to be done?
Yeah.
So I think that was one place that we really started to dive into at the beginning, and it felt really aligned. And so that's when we then were like, all right, let's dig deeper and let's go further.
Yep. I do see a question in the chat. So that's a good question about print communications. We've definitely scaled back, and are mostly digital. We've done magazines in the past, and COVID kind of killed that. But we were mainly digital at this point. So. One thing I did, I mean, the La La Land, being off in La La Land, not going where you're going,
Yeah.
the I think the audit was super valuable in that I didn't feel like I was flying blind. I knew when we had to communicate and who we had to communicate. It gave kind of a structure. And then it gave the opportunity to really refresh how we were communicating and talking about things. We had, we really hadn't changed how we described our events. We would kind of use the same every year. We kind of cycle things in and out. So kind of taking that opportunity to be a little more creative, and working. We represent financial institutions, so but taking the opportunity to have a little fun, and engage our members that way. So
Sounds like you have a lot of good efforts being made, but a lot to be proud of.
absolutely.
Julie, the time has been invaluable. Thank you so much for spending time and sharing your experience and your wisdom today. Myself and Amy and the whole community really appreciates it. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
And thank you to everyone who joined in today and is listening afterwards for today's topic. If you want to be invited to the next community learning event, you can do so on associationrockstars.com. And until next time that we're together, Association Rock On.